The vultures knew death was coming. 5 of them circled lazily in the cloudless Wyoming sky, black silhouettes against harsh blue, patient in their hunger. Below them, half hidden in tall grass, lay a small German shepherd puppy, its ribs showing through patchy fur, breath coming in shallow, irregular gasps. The pup's eyes glazed, yet somehow still alert, tracked the bird's movements with primal fear. A thin military tag glinted on its emaciated body, catching the merciless afternoon sun. Staff Sergeant Chayton Wakasa hadn't planned to stop. Not here, not today. The adapted controls of his pickup truck hummed beneath calloused hands as he navigated the lonely back road, his wheelchair secured beside him. Then he saw them. The deathbirds and something inside him, something he thought had died in Afghanistan, stirred to life. He slammed the brakes, dust billowing around his vehicle. The vultures scattered momentarily, their wings beating against the sky in protest. But they didn't go far. They knew what he didn't yet, that some battles against death cannot be won. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. Staff Sergeant Chayton Wakasa had been driving for 3 hours through the Wyoming wilderness before he spotted the vultures. At 38, his face was weathered beyond his years, deep lines etching a map of pain around eyes that had seen too much. The Lakota Sioux heritage was evident in his high cheekbones and copper skin, though his military short black hair gave little hint of the warrior braids his ancestors might have worn. His adapted truck, modified to accommodate the wheelchair he'd been confined to since Afghanistan, was one of his few remaining connections to his former life. 3 years had passed since the IED that shattered his spine and took the lives of 2 men under his command. 3 years of surgeries, rehabilitation, nightmares, and the crushing weight of survivor's guilt. The Veterans Affairs doctors called it PTSD. Chayton called it his penance. He'd chosen this remote corner of Wyoming deliberately, purchasing a small cabin with his military pension, no neighbors for miles, just the mountains, sky, and silence. Most days, he spoke to no one but the ghosts that haunted him. His Lakota grandfather would have said his spirit was walking separate from his body. The VA psychiatrist just called it isolation behavior. Both were right. The German shepherd puppy lying on the roadside couldn't have been more than 4 months old. Its coat, which should have been rich and lustrous, was dull and patchy. Bones protruded sharply against skin, but it was the eyes that caught Chayton amber brown and filled with a desperate will to live despite the odds. Those eyes reminded him of Masika, the military working dog who had saved his life in the mountains of Afghanistan before losing her own. Chayton had recognized the military tattoo immediately, a series of letters and numbers on the inner thigh that marked the pup as government property, a military working dog candidate. But the question pounding through his mind as he lifted himself from his chair to the ground was, why was a military canine puppy abandoned in the wilderness, left to die alone beneath circling vultures? What he didn't know yet was that this dying puppy would lead him back to the world of the living and into a fight against corruption that would test everything he had left. "Stay with me, boy," Chayton muttered, his voice hoarse from disuse as he carefully wrapped the trembling puppy in his jacket. The animal barely responded, its breath coming in shallow gasps. Years of battlefield triage kicked in as Chayton assessed the situation with practiced efficiency. Severe dehydration, malnutrition, possible internal injuries. The pup needed professional help, and fast. Moving with the upper body strength developed since his injury, Chayton transferred himself back into his truck and settled the dog onto the passenger seat. A quick check of his phone showed no service typical for this remote stretch. The nearest town was Prairie Wind, about 25 miles away. It wasn't much, but it had to have a vet. "Don't you die on me," he said, glancing at the bundle of fur as he started the engine. The puppy's eyes fluttered but remained closed. "I've had enough death for one lifetime." The truck ate up the miles as Chayton pushed it harder than the rough roads warranted, his knuckles white on the hand controls. Every few minutes, he'd reach over to check that the dog was still breathing, his own breath catching when the pup's chest seemed to pause between respirations. Prairie Wind materialized on the horizon like a mirage, a handful of buildings clustered around a main street that had seen better days. Chayton scanned the faded storefronts until he spotted a simple sign, Makawi Veterinary Services. He pulled into the gravel parking lot, tires spitting stones. Getting himself and the dog inside was a logistical challenge. His wheelchair was specially designed for his independence. But he'd never practiced transferring while holding a dying animal. Sweat beaded on his forehead as he maneuvered both of them through the clinic's door. Triggering a small bell. "Be right there," called a woman's voice from the back. "I need help now," Chayton shouted, the military authority returning to his voice automatically. A slender woman in her mid-30s emerged from a back room. Wiping her hands on a towel, her dark hair was pulled back in a practical braid, and her eyes widened at the sight of Chayton and his burden. "What happened?" she asked, immediately moving toward them. "Found him abandoned. Military canine puppy. Based on the tattoo, he's barely hanging on." The veterinarian, Dr. Ayana Makawi, according to her name tag, gently took the bundle from Chayton's arms. "Bring him back here, now." Chayton followed her into an examination room, watching as she unwrapped the puppy and began her assessment. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, checking vitals, examining gums, palpating the abdomen. "He's severely dehydrated, malnourished," she said, confirming what Chayton already knew. "I need to start fluids immediately." "Where exactly did you find him?" 25 miles east, middle of nowhere." Chayton watched her work, noting the slight furrow of her brow. "Can you save him?" Dr. Makawi paused, her hand resting gently on the puppy's head. "I should be honest with you. The humane thing might be to end his suffering. His condition is extremely critical." Chayton felt something harden inside him. "No, he deserves a chance." "Sir, I understand your concern, but no." The word came out like a military command. "This dog was abandoned to die. Someone left him there deliberately. I won't finish what they started." Their eyes met across the examination table, a silent battle of wills. Chayton noticed a flicker of something in her expression. Recognition, perhaps, or understanding. "You said he has a military tattoo?" she asked, her tone shifting. "Inner thigh, standard DOD marking." Dr. Makawi gently turned the puppy and examined the tattoo, her expression changing subtly. "I see." Something in her voice made Chayton look more closely at her. "You recognize it." She hesitated. "Let me focus on stabilizing him first. Then we'll talk." She reached for an IV kit and began the delicate process of finding a vein in the dehydrated pup. "It's going to be expensive if we proceed with treatment, and I can't guarantee outcomes." "Money's not an issue." It wasn't entirely true, but Chayton had little to spend his disability payments on out in the wilderness. Over the next hour, Dr. Makawi worked methodically to stabilize the puppy. Fluids dripped steadily into his veins. Medications were administered. Blood was drawn for testing. Through it all, Chayton remained in the room, watching with the intense focus of a soldier on a mission. "What's your name?" she asked finally, breaking the silence as she adjusted the fluid rate. "Staff Sergeant Chetan Wicasa, former Special Forces." "Former?" she repeated, nodding slightly. "I'm Ayana Makawi. You're native too." It wasn't a question. "Cherokee. On my mother's side." She checked the puppy's temperature again. "This little guy is fighting hard. He's stabilizing, but he's not out of danger yet. He needs a name," Chetan said, surprising himself with the thought. Dr. Makawi looked up. "You planning on keeping him if he makes it?" The question hung in the air between them. Chetan hadn't thought that far ahead. His isolated existence hadn't included room for another being, especially one that would need extensive care. "Valor," he said finally, ignoring her question. "His name is Valor." Something softened in Dr. Makawi's expression. "It fits him." Night had fallen by the time Valor was stable enough that Dr. Makawi felt comfortable stepping away. She'd set up a small monitoring station beside the treatment table and brought in a chair for Chetan, who had refused to leave. "You should get some rest," she suggested, stretching her back. "There's a motel down the street." "I'll stay." His tone left no room for argument. She studied him for a moment, then nodded. "I'll be in my office. The sofa pulls out if you change your mind." Left alone with Valor, Chetan wheeled closer to the table. The puppy's breathing had steadied, though it remained shallow. IV fluids dripped steadily, and a warming blanket kept his temperature regulated. "You've got fight in you," Chetan whispered, carefully placing his hand on the dog's bony side. "Good. You're going to need it." He dozed fitfully in his chair, jerking awake at every change in the monitoring equipment's rhythm. Sometime past midnight, he felt movement beneath his hand and opened his eyes to find Valor watching him. The pup's eyes were clearer now, though still glazed with pain and exhaustion. "Welcome back, soldier," Chetan murmured. Valor's tail, little more than skin and bone, gave the faintest thump against the table. When morning came, Dr. Makawi returned to find both of them asleep. Valor curled slightly toward the man, Chetan's hand protectively resting on the dog's side. His head tilted against the wheelchair's backrest. She watched them for a moment before clearing her throat. "He made it through the night," she said as Chetan jerked awake. "That's the first hurdle cleared." Chetan rubbed his face, wiping away the remnants of troubled sleep. "What's next?" "Blood work results should be back soon. We'll need to start him on a careful feeding regimen. Continue fluids. Monitor for organ damage." She checked Valor's vitals as she spoke. "About that tattoo." "You recognized it," Chetan said. It wasn't a question. Dr. Makawi's hands stilled. "Yes, it's from a specialized military working dog program. But there's something wrong here. Dogs from this program don't just end up abandoned in the wilderness. Someone wanted him dead." "What makes you say that?" Chetan's expression hardened. 25 miles from the nearest town, no water source, vultures already circling. They didn't abandon him. Dr. Makawi, they left him to die. The question is, why?" Their conversation was interrupted as Valor stirred, whimpering softly. Dr. Makawi immediately shifted her attention back to her patient, but Chetan caught the troubled look in her eyes. "I need to make some calls," she said finally. "This pup should never have been out there. Something's very wrong with this situation." As she left the room, Chetan turned back to Valor, whose amber eyes now followed his movements, despite everything. Despite the pain that Chetan knew the dog must be feeling, there was something in those eyes that reached past the walls he'd built around himself. "Don't worry," he said softly. his hand gently stroking the pup's head. "You're not alone anymore. We'll figure this out together." And for the first time in 3 years, Staff Sergeant Chaitin Wicasa made a promise he intended to keep. By the 3rd day, Valor had improved enough that Dr. McAwee reluctantly agreed he could leave the clinic, provided he had round-the-clock care. The puppy still couldn't stand for more than a few seconds, but his eyes now tracked movement, and he had begun accepting small amounts of a special rehydration formula. "You sure you can handle this, Doctor?" McAwee asked as she prepared discharge instructions. "He needs medication every 6 hours, careful monitoring, and his feeding has to be strictly controlled." Chaitin nodded, watching Valor rest on a soft blanket. "I've got nowhere to be and nothing but time. What about your place? You mentioned it's remote." "Too far," Chaitin admitted. "I found a cabin rental on the edge of town. It's not much, but it'll work until he's stronger." Dr. McAwee handed him a bag of supplies, medications, special food, syringes for feeding if necessary. "I'll need to check on him daily for the first week. Whatever it takes." The small rental cabin was bare bones, a main room with kitchenette, a bedroom barely large enough for the twin bed, and a bathroom with a shower that wouldn't accommodate Chaitin's wheelchair. He'd have to make do with sponge baths for now. The landlord had looked dubious when Chaitin mentioned a dog, but had relented when offered an extra deposit. Chaitin set up a makeshift bed for Valor near the wood stove, making sure the pup could see him from any position in the main room. The first night was rough. Valor whimpered in his sleep, legs twitching with phantom runs or fights. Chaitin knew those dreams all too well. "Easy, soldier," he murmured whenever the pup grew restless. "You're safe now." Around 2 a.m., Chaitin jerked awake from his own nightmare, the familiar scene of the Afghanistan mountain pass. The explosion, his men screaming. His heart hammered against his ribs as he oriented himself, the phantom smell of burning metal lingering in his nostrils. A soft whine broke through his panic. Valor was watching him, head slightly raised despite the effort it clearly cost. "Sorry. Boy, didn't mean to wake you." Chaitin wheeled over and gently stroked the pup's head. "Old ghosts." Valor's tail thumped weakly against the blanket. "You understand, don't you?" Chaitin whispered. "You've seen things too." For the rest of that night, Chaitin slept on the floor beside Valor's bed, one hand resting lightly on the pup's side. Both slept more peacefully than they had in a long time. The days fell into a routine. Dr. McAwee visited each morning, checking Valor's progress and adjusting his care plan. By the 5th day, the pup was managing to stand and take a few wobbly steps before collapsing back onto his bed. His eyes were brighter, following Chaitin's movements around the cabin with increasing alertness. "He's starting to fill out a bit," Dr. McAwee observed on the 6th day, gently running her hands along Valor's sides. "The feeding plan is working, but I'm still concerned about his blood work. His liver values are off, suggesting he may have been exposed to something toxic." "Deliberately?" Chaitin asked, his voice tight. Dr. McAwee hesitated. "I can't say for certain, but it's possible." That night, as a light rain began to fall, Chaitin sat by the window watching the weather deteriorate. Weather reports had mentioned a storm system moving in, but the intensity of the wind now whipping the trees suggested something stronger than predicted. His phone buzzed a text from Dr. McAwee. "Weather Service upgraded to severe storm warning. Flash flood potential. You two okay?" "Fine for now," he texted back. "Cabin's on high ground." He checked on Valor. who had become restless with the changing barometric pressure. "Just a storm," Chayton assured him. "We've both seen worse." By midnight, the storm had intensified to a fury that rattled the cabin's windows. Rain lashed against the glass in horizontal sheets. Driven by winds that howled through the eaves, Chayton stayed awake, monitoring both the storm and Valor, who had pressed himself against Chayton's wheelchair, trembling slightly. The first crack came just after 2 a.m., a sharp, splintering sound from the roof. Water began to drip, then pour through a widening fissure in the ceiling. Chayton quickly moved Valor to the kitchen area, away from the growing puddle. "Hang tight," he told the pup. "I need to check how bad it is." Using the flashlight on his phone, Chayton examined the damage. The roof beam had split, compromising the structure. As he watched, the crack widened, and a section of ceiling sagged ominously. "We need to get out of here," he muttered, getting himself. Valor and essential supplies to the truck would be challenging enough in daylight with good weather. In a raging storm, in the middle of the night, nearly impossible. But as another section of ceiling gave way with a groan, Chayton knew they had no choice. He quickly gathered Valor's medications and a blanket, stuffing them into a backpack he could hang from his wheelchair. The dog watched him with increasing anxiety, sensing the danger. "Okay, boy," Chayton said, maneuvering next to Valor. "I need to pick you up, and it might not be comfortable for either of us." As gently as possible, he lifted the puppy into his lap. Valor was still too weak to balance there on his own, so Chayton had to use one arm to secure him while using his other hand to operate the wheelchair. It was awkward and painfully slow. They had just reached the door when a tremendous crash came from behind them. Chayton looked back to see that the beam had completely given way, bringing down a large section of the roof. Rain and wind whipped into the cabin's interior, soaking everything within seconds. The storm's full fury hit them as Chayton opened the door. Rain stung his face, nearly blinding him as he struggled to navigate the short wooden ramp. His wheels slipped on the wet surface, nearly sending them careening off the edge. "Hold on!" he shouted over the wind. Though the words were whipped away instantly, the distance to his truck, normally a matter of seconds, became an agonizing journey. The uneven ground, softened by rain, caught at his wheels. Twice he had to stop and readjust his grip on Valor, who was shivering violently now, whether from fear or cold. Chayton couldn't tell. Finally reaching the truck, Chayton fumbled with the door handle, fingers numb from the cold and rain. Inside, he quickly wrapped Valor in the emergency blanket kept behind the seat, then turned the engine on for heat before beginning the laborious process of breaking down his wheelchair to stow it. As the truck's headlights cut through the darkness, Chayton saw the full extent of the storm's damage. Trees bent almost double in the wind, debris scattered across the access road. Getting out would be a challenge, but staying was no longer an option as he watched the cabin's roof continue to collapse. "Hang on," he told Valor. Putting the truck in gear, the road had transformed into a muddy creek. Chayton's adapted truck, with its hand controls, required all his concentration as they slipped and slid through the worst of it. Halfway down the access road, a fallen branch blocked their path. "Damn it!" Chayton slammed his hand against the steering wheel. In the passenger seat, Valor stirred, raising his head weakly. Their eyes met in the dim light of the dashboard. "Got any ideas?" Chayton asked wryly. To his surprise, Valor struggled to his feet, wobbling but determined. The pup pressed his nose against the window, then looked back at Chayton with a whine. "We're not leaving the truck in this weather." "Buddy, you can barely walk on a good day," Valor whined again, more insistently. Chayton sighed. Fine, let me think. He scanned the surroundings, searching for an alternative route. There, to the right, a gap between the trees might be just wide enough for the truck. It would mean going off-road in a storm. But it was that, or sit there hoping the rising water didn't reach them. Here goes nothing, he muttered, carefully steering toward the gap. The truck lurched and groaned as it navigated the rough terrain, each bump sending pain shooting up Chayton's damaged spine. But the gap widened into something resembling a game trail, and soon they were moving parallel to the main road after what felt like hours, but was likely only 30 minutes. The lights of Prairie Wind came into view through the rain-streaked windshield. The small town was largely dark. Power must be out, but Chayton could make out the illuminated sign of the veterinary clinic, likely running on a generator. He pulled into the parking lot and texted Dr. McAwee. Cabin roof collapsed. We're in your parking lot. Moments later, the clinic's door opened, and Dr. McAwee appeared, wearing a rain jacket and carrying a large umbrella. She hurried to the truck. Get inside, both of you, she said, opening the passenger door first to help with Valor. Once inside, Dr. McAwee quickly wrapped Valor in warm towels while Chayton struggled out of his soaked jacket. What happened? She asked, checking Valor for any new injuries. Storm took out part of the roof. Had to make a run for it. Chayton's teeth chattered slightly as the adrenaline began to fade, leaving exhaustion in its wake. You could have been killed, she said, her voice tight with that concern. Wouldn't be the first time I've nearly bought it. Dr. McAwee looked at him sharply. Then her expression softened. Let me get you some dry clothes. I keep extras here for emergencies. While she was gone, Chayton checked his phone and was surprised to see an email notification. It was from a name he hadn't seen in years, Dakota Enape, his former battle buddy who'd gotten out of the Army a year before Chayton's injury. The subject line made his blood run cold. Urgent. Your dog is in danger. Chayton opened the email just as Dr. McAwee returned with dry clothes. What is it? She asked, seeing his expression. A message from an old Army friend. Chayton said slowly. He says Valor isn't just from any military program. He's part of something called Project Shadow Sentinel, a classified breeding initiative for next-generation K9 units. And according to official records, this dog doesn't exist. He was reported as terminated due to training deficiencies 3 weeks ago. Dr. McAwee's face paled. That's impossible. He's sitting right here. Exactly, Chayton said grimly. Someone falsified records, dumped him to die, and is covering it up. The question is why? As if in answer, his phone pinged with another message from Coda. They know he's alive. They know someone took him. You need to disappear. Now. Dawn broke over Prairie Wind with the storm's remnants still lingering in puddles and scattered debris. Inside the veterinary clinic, Chayton studied his friend Coda's messages while Dr. McAwee examined Valor, who appeared remarkably resilient despite their midnight escape. Your friend seems well informed, Dr. McAwee said, glancing at Chayton. Military intelligence. Former. Now he works private security but keeps his old contacts. Chayton wheeled closer to the examination table. He's looking into who's behind this Shadow Sentinel program and why they'd falsify records about Valor. Dr. McAwee's hands stilled on Valor's coat. I may know more than I initially let on, she admitted quietly. Chayton wasn't surprised. He'd suspected as much from her reaction to the tattoo. Tell me. She took a deep breath. 2 years ago, I worked as a contract veterinarian for a military working dog program in Colorado. Initially, It was standard work health assessments, vaccinations, minor surgeries. Then they started a new breeding initiative with strict security protocols. We weren't allowed to document certain procedures or outcomes. "Shadow Sentinel," Chayton supplied. She nodded. Though they never used that name around us, the breeding program aimed to develop dogs with enhanced physical and cognitive capabilities, German Shepherds, Belgian Malinois, and hybrids. What went wrong? Their standards were impossible. Puppies were eliminated for the slightest deviations from their metrics: mild hip dysplasia, sensitivity to noise, even temperament traits like being too friendly. Her voice hardened. I was told the unsuccessful candidates were transferred to police departments or adopted out. But they weren't, Chayton stated flatly. I started to suspect something when none of my requests to follow up on transferred puppies were approved. Then I found a mass grave behind one of the training facilities, dozens of puppies, all with training program tattoos. Her eyes glistened. I resigned immediately and filed reports with the Inspector General's office and animal welfare organizations. Nothing happened. 2 weeks later, my apartment was broken into. All my documentation missing. Chayton processed this information with growing anger. And that's when you moved here. As far from Colorado as I could manage while still practicing, I thought it was over. She looked down at Valor. "Until you brought him in," Valor whined softly, as if understanding he was the subject of their conversation. His eyes, growing clearer by the day, moved between them. Chayton's phone buzzed with another message from Coda. "Found you a safe house, remote cabin on Lakota Reservation land. South Dakota, no paper trail. Can you make it by tomorrow?" "We need to move," Chayton said, showing Dr. Makawi the message. "All of us?" "Me. Why would I?" "Because you're a witness who can verify Valor's identity and condition, because you have knowledge of the program, and because they almost certainly know you treated him by now." His voice left no room for argument. "Pack whatever you need for Valor's continued treatment. We leave in 30 minutes. While Dr. Makawi gathered supplies, Chayton made arrangements with Coda for the safe house access and transferred funds from his modest savings to a prepaid card, harder to track than credit cards or bank withdrawals. Years of special operations had taught him how to disappear when necessary. They left Prairie Wind in Dr. Makawi's SUV, less conspicuous than Chayton's adapted truck, and better suited for the rough terrain they might encounter. Chayton's wheelchair was disassembled in the back, with Valor nestled in a makeshift bed of blankets in the rear seat. 8 hours to the reservation, Dr. Makawi said as they pulled onto the highway. "I have a colleague covering my practice for family emergency leave." "Good thinking." Chayton kept his eyes on the road behind them, scanning for any vehicles that might be following. "Tell me more about the program. Who was in charge?" "Colonel Richard Blackwood officially, but there were others men in civilian clothes who never introduced themselves." She adjusted her grip on the steering wheel. The breeding methods were ethically questionable at best. They used artificial insemination with genetic material from their highest-performing dogs, often pushing female dogs through multiple litters without adequate recovery time. And the training. Brutal. Puppies were separated from mothers at 5 weeks instead of 8. They used shock collars on dogs as young as 3 months. Sleep deprivation. Food restriction for any incorrect responses. Her knuckles whitened. I lodged formal complaints, but they were always dismissed as necessary for national security. Chayton looked back at Valor, who was watching the passing landscape with apparent interest. What made him a failure in their eyes? Without seeing his records, I can't be certain, but based on his age and physical condition, I'd guess he showed insufficient aggression or failed their stress tests. She glanced in the rearview mirror at the puppy. Some dogs just don't have the temperament. They wanted the ability to attack without hesitation or work through extreme pain. They wanted weapons, not partners, Chayton said bitterly. He knew the difference. Masika, his former military working dog, had been a true partner, intelligent and skilled, yet capable of discernment and compassion. They crossed into South Dakota as the sun began to set. Stopping only for fuel and brief rest breaks for Valor, the puppy was proving remarkably adaptable, accepting water and small amounts of food from Chayton's hand at each stop. His resilience is extraordinary, Dr. McAwee observed after one such break. Most puppies in his condition wouldn't have survived the first night, let alone everything since. He's a fighter, Chayton said simply. The reservation land appeared on the horizon as night fell, completely rolling hills and pine forests silhouetted against the star-filled sky. Coda had provided coordinates rather than an address, leading them down progressively smaller roads until they were crawling along a dirt track barely visible in the headlights. "There," Chayton said, spotting a small cabin nestled among the pines. No lights were visible, but smoke curled from the chimney. Dr. McAwee parked behind the cabin, out of sight from the access road. Before they could exit the vehicle, the cabin door opened, spilling golden light onto the ground. A large man stood silhouetted in the doorway. "Coda," Chayton breathed, recognizing his friend's distinctive broad-shouldered outline. Coda Enepe moved with surprising grace for a man his size, quickly helping Dr. Hall McAwee unload supplies while Chayton assembled his wheelchair. Once inside, Coda embraced Chayton in a bear hug that lifted him partially from his chair. 3 years, brother, too damn long, Coda said, his deep voice resonating in the small cabin. "Been busy feeling sorry for myself," Chayton replied with surprising honesty. Coda nodded toward Valor, who was cautiously exploring the cabin's main room. "Until he found you, or I found him?" Chayton made introductions between Coda and Dr. McAwee. "She has first-hand knowledge of the program." Coda's expression turned serious. "Good, because what I've uncovered is ugly." He spread several folders on the rustic wooden table. "Shadow Sentinel isn't just a breeding program, it's a black-budget operation funded through defense contractor kickbacks and congressional dark money. Officially, it doesn't exist. That explains the lack of response to my reports," Dr. McAwee said, examining the documents. "Exactly. Your complaints were buried by the same people running the program." Coda pointed to a photograph of a stern-faced man in military dress uniform. "Colonel Richard Blackwood, former Delta Force, now runs the K-9 division at Fort Carson. On paper, he's developing advanced training protocols for military working dogs. Off the books, he's creating what he calls the perfect war dog: animals with no fear response, complete obedience, and enhanced aggression. And making money doing it," Chayton noted, spotting financial reports among the documents. "Millions," Coda confirmed. "They've been selling the successful dogs to private military contractors at 10 times the normal cost of a trained military K-9. The failures, He glanced at Valor. "They're disposed of to keep the program's success rate artificially high on paper." Dr. McAwee paled. "How many? Based on breeding records I accessed. At least 70 puppies in the last year alone." Silence fell over the cabin, broken only by the crackling fire and Valor's soft padding as he explored his new environment. The puppy eventually returned to Chayton's side, leaning against his wheelchair with newfound strength. "He's tracking everything we say," Coda observed. "Smart little guy." "Too smart. Maybe," Dr. Saul Makawi suggested. "Intelligence without blind obedience would be considered a failure in their program." "So what's our play?" Chayton asked, scratching Valor behind the ears. "We can't just hide forever." Coda leaned forward. "We build a case. Dr. Makawi's testimony, your discovery of Valor, my financial paper trail, but we need more physical evidence of the mistreatment and the financial fraud. The euthanized puppies," Dr. Makawi said. "If we could exhume some of them, prove they were healthy animals killed for failing arbitrary standards, and connect the money trail directly to Blackwood," Coda added. "He's been careful, using shell companies and offshore accounts." Chayton nodded slowly. "We'd need someone inside the program, someone with access." "I might know someone," Coda said. "Sergeant Major Daniel Whitehorse, Navajo, old-school NCO who runs the legitimate canine training programs at Fort Carson. He never bought Blackwood's explanations about where the washout puppies were going. Can you contact him securely?" "Already have. He's gathering what he can. But carefully. Blackwood has eyes everywhere." They spent the next several hours developing a strategy, identifying what evidence they needed and how to obtain it without exposing themselves. As midnight approached, Dr. Makawi excused herself to check on Valor, who had fallen asleep on a blanket near the fireplace. Once they were alone, Coda fixed Chayton with a penetrating stare. "You doing okay with all this? You've been off-grid for years, and now you're diving headfirst into a military conspiracy." Chayton considered the question seriously. "For the first time since Afghanistan, I feel purpose, like I'm not just taking up space anymore." "The dog," Coda nodded understanding. "He's good medicine for you. We're good medicine for each other." Chayton watched as Dr. V. Makawi gently examined Valor in his sleep. "I couldn't save my men. Maybe I can save him." "And he's already saving you," Coda observed quietly. The next few weeks established a new routine. The cabin, while remote, had been equipped with modern amenities, including satellite internet, allowing Coda to continue his investigation remotely. Dr. Makawi divided her time between treating Valor and consulting with trusted colleagues about his ongoing recovery. Chayton focused on Valor's basic training, discovering the pup had an exceptional aptitude for learning despite his rough start. By the third week, Valor had transformed. His coat had begun to fill in with the rich black and tan coloration typical of German shepherds. He'd gained weight, his ribs no longer visible beneath his fur. Most remarkably, his demeanor had evolved from fearful vigilance to cautious curiosity. "He's responding to the stable environment," Dr. Makawi Ayana, as she'd asked to be called, explained as they watched Valor carefully carrying a stick around the cabin's perimeter. "Feeling safe allows his natural temperament to emerge, which is intelligent, observant, loyal, but not blindly obedient or unnecessarily aggressive, exactly what Blackwood would consider flaws." She smiled as Valor dropped the stick at Chayton's feet. "He wants to please you, but he makes decisions too. That independent thinking would be trained out of him in their program." Chayton tossed the stick, watching with satisfaction as Valor bounded after it with growing strength. "Their loss, our gain." Their investigation progressed steadily. Sergeant Major Whitehorse had begun documenting irregularities in the breeding program's records. carefully copying documents that showed discrepancies between reported outcomes and actual puppy counts. Coda had traced financial transactions through several shell companies to offshore accounts linked to Blackwood and 2 civilian contractors. "We're building a solid case," Coda announced one evening as they reviewed their evidence. "Inspector General would have to act on this, even with the program's political protection. Assuming we live long enough to present it," Chayton said dryly. He'd noticed a black SUV on the main road twice in the past week, possibly coincidence. But his instincts said otherwise. "We should move the timeline up," Ayanna suggested. "The longer we wait, the more puppies die." Before they could discuss further, Valor suddenly stood at attention, ears forward, a low growl building in his throat. He faced the cabin's front door, hackles raised. "Someone's coming," Coda whispered, immediately extinguishing the main lights. Through the window, they spotted headlights approaching slowly along the access road, the same black SUV Chayton had noticed earlier. "Back door," Chayton directed, already moving toward it. "Coda, grab the evidence. Ayanna, get Valor." They slipped into the surrounding forest just as the SUV pulled up to the cabin. From their position among the pines, they watched as 2 men in civilian clothes but military bearing emerged, weapons drawn. "Blackwood's people," Coda breathed. "How did they find us?" "Questions later," Chayton replied, watching as the men approached the cabin. "We need distance now." They retreated deeper into the forest, making their way toward a secondary vehicle Coda had prepared for emergency evacuation, an old pickup truck hidden under camouflage netting a half-mile away. Chayton's wheelchair made the journey challenging, but years of adaptive training had prepared him for rough terrain. Valor stayed close to Chayton, occasionally looking back toward the cabin with heightened alertness. Twice he froze, ears forward, before changing their direction slightly, steering them away from something only he could detect. "He's warning us," Ayanna whispered the second time, impressed. "There must be more men in the woods." They reached the truck without incident and quickly loaded their essential belongings. As Coda prepared to start the engine, distant shouts and a muffled explosion indicated the men had found and entered the cabin. "Time to go," Coda said grimly, firing up the truck's engine as they pulled away, following a little-used logging road away from the reservation. Chayton looked down at Valor, who sat alert between him and Ayanna in the truck's cab. "They're not going to stop looking for him, are they?" Ayanna asked, her hand protectively on Valor's back. "No," Chayton replied, his resolve hardening. "Which means we stop playing defense. It's time we take the fight to them." Coda glanced at him. Recognizing the tone, it was the voice of the Special Forces operator he'd served with, not the reclusive veteran of recent years. "What do you have in mind? We've been gathering evidence to hand off to authorities, hoping they'll act, but Blackwood has too much protection for that to work cleanly." Chayton's eyes gleamed with newfound purpose. "We need to make this public, so public that no one can bury it, and to do that, we need to get inside Fort Carson." "Oh, that's insane," Ayanna protested. "It's a military base with full security. Not for someone with valid military ID and a reason to be there." Chayton countered, patting his wallet where his veteran's identification still resided. "Especially not on their annual K9 demonstration day, which happens to be next week." Coda's expression shifted from concern to slow appreciation. "When there will be press, distinguished visitors, and dozens of outside contractors on base." "Exactly?" Chayton looked down at Valor, who returned his gaze with unwavering trust. They tried to bury him. They never expected he'd come back to expose them. As the truck wound its way through the dark mountain roads, a plan began to form, dangerous and bold, but with the potential to bring the entire corrupt program crashing down. For the first time since his injury, Chaitin felt the familiar rush of mission planning, of purpose aligned with justice. Valor sensed the change in him, pressing closer to his side. They had both been discarded, left for dead. Now they would show Colonel Blackwood and his co-conspirators exactly what a mistake that had been. Fort Carson Military Base sprawled across the Colorado landscape, its boundaries marked by chain-link fencing and guard checkpoints. From their observation point a mile away, Chaitin studied the facility through binoculars, focusing on the canine training grounds where preparations for the annual Military Working Dog Demonstration Day were underway. Main grandstand is being set up on the north side of the field, he reported to Coda and Ayana, who waited beside him in their nondescript rental van. Media area to the east. 5 camera crews already in position. Any sign of Blackwood? Coda asked, checking his watch. Not yet, but there's a lot of brass present. This event's bigger than I expected. In the back of the van, Valor sat alert, his transformation over the past weeks remarkable. The once dying puppy had filled out into a handsome young dog, his coat gleaming with health, his eyes bright with intelligence. At nearly 6 months old, he still had the gangly proportions of adolescence, but his bearing showed growing confidence. "Are we sure about this?" Ayana asked, adjusting the small camera disguised as a button on her jacket. "Once we're inside, there's no easy exit. We've been over the plan a dozen times," Chaitin said, lowering the binoculars. "Coda enters as a veteran observer with proper credentials. You go in as his guest with veterinary documentation. I enter through the VA Medical Center on the east side. They're expecting me for a physical therapy consultation I scheduled last week." "And Valor," Chaitin glanced at the dog. "He stays hidden in the van until we're ready. The van's in the civilian parking area, close enough for quick access." They'd spent a week planning this operation, gathering additional evidence and making contacts. Sergeant Major Whitehorse had provided crucial intelligence about the demonstration event, including security protocols and Blackwood's schedule. Most importantly, he'd confirmed the location of the restricted Shadow Sentinel training facility, a nondescript building labeled simply as Canine Medical Research on the base maps. "One more thing," Coda said, handing each of them a small earpiece. "These connect to our phones via Bluetooth. We'll maintain communication at all times. Check your equipment one last time," Chaitin instructed, running through his own mental checklist. Ayana had her veterinary credentials, supporting documentation about Valor's condition when found, and hidden camera. Coda carried his veteran's ID, visitor pass, and a concealed thumb drive containing the financial evidence they'd compiled. Chaitin had his medical appointment confirmation, wheelchair with specially modified compartments, and a military ID that would grant him access to most non-restricted areas of the base. Most crucially, Valor wore a new collar with a built-in GPS tracker and a pouch containing a microchip extracted from his original military implant, proof positive of his identity as one of the terminated Shadow Sentinel puppies. "It's time," Chaitin said, checking his watch. "Remember, we stay separate until the demonstration begins. Target time is 1400 hours, when Blackwood is scheduled to give his presentation." They synchronized their watches, each feeling the gravity of what they were about to attempt. Coda would be first, followed by Ayana, 10 minutes later, Chayton would enter through the medical facility 30 minutes after that. "See you on the inside?" Kota said, clapping Chayton on the shoulder before departing in his own vehicle. Left alone with Ayanna and Valor, Chayton felt a familiar pre-mission tension, the calm focus that had served him well in Special Forces. What was different now was the undercurrent of personal stake. This wasn't just about exposing corruption. It was about justice for Valor and the dozens of puppies who hadn't survived. "Be careful in there," Ayanna said quietly, her hand resting on Valor's head. "Blackwood has everything to lose." "Which makes him predictable," Chayton replied. "Men like him follow patterns when cornered." After Ayanna left for her entry point, Chayton spent his remaining time with Valor. Reinforcing the commands they'd practiced, the dog had proven remarkably trainable, picking up complex instructions with minimal repetition. "Stay hidden until I call," he told Valor, looking directly into the dog's intelligent eyes. "Then find me, no matter what." Valor's soft whine and intent focus suggested understanding beyond his months. Chayton secured him in the specially prepared area of the van, leaving water and making sure the ventilation was adequate. "I'll be back for you," he promised. The VA Medical Center entrance was as expected, busy with veterans seeking treatment. Staffed by overworked but friendly personnel, Chayton's appointment with the physical therapist was real, scheduled as cover for his presence on base. He went through the motions of the evaluation, answering questions about his paralysis while maintaining awareness of the time. "Your upper body strength is exceptional," the therapist commented, making notes in his file. "Necessity." Chayton replied simply, "I live alone." At precisely 1320 hours, he excused himself to use the restroom, then navigated through the connecting corridor that led to the main base. His veteran's ID and medical appointment documentation were checked at the security point. But as Whitehorse had predicted, the guard merely verified his identity before waving him through. Once on the main base, Chayton activated his earpiece. "Eagle in position," he murmured, using their agreed-upon call signs. "Wolf on sight, near the demonstration grounds," came Kota's response. "Fox at the media staging area," Ayanna added a moment later. "Crowd gathering. Blackwood just arrived with his entourage." Chayton wheeled toward the demonstration area, moving with purpose but not hurry. His years in the military had taught him that confidence was the best disguise act like you belong, and few will question your presence. The K-9 demonstration grounds were filling with spectators, military personnel, civilian contractors, media, and families of base staff. A temporary grandstand had been erected, and a demonstration area was cordoned off with security barriers. Various working dogs with their handlers were warming up at one end of the field. Chayton positioned himself at the edge of the viewing area, where the crowd was thinner, and he had a clear sight line to both the main stage and the building Whitehorse had identified as the Shadow Sentinel facility. About 100 yards away, "Visual on Blackwood," he reported, spotting the colonel near the VIP section, resplendent in his dress uniform, speaking animatedly with several civilians in expensive suits. "And our friend Sergeant Major Whitehorse is approaching the stage with the demonstration team." The Sergeant Major, a dignified Navajo man with graying temples, was coordinating the handlers and their dogs, his bearing impeccable as he prepared for the official program. "Media is set up and ready," Ayanna reported. "I've made contact with the reporter from the Denver Post. She's interested in our story but wants proof before committing." "She'll have it soon," Chayton assured her. At precisely 1400 hours, the base commander approached the microphone to begin the ceremony. After brief welcoming remarks, He introduced Colonel Blackwood as the visionary leader revolutionizing military working dog programs for the 21st century. Blackwood took the stage to polite applause, his voice carrying clearly across the demonstration grounds as he spoke about tradition, innovation, and the unparalleled capabilities of American military working dogs. Behind him, handlers and their canine partners lined up for the demonstrations to follow. "Time to move," Chayton murmured into his earpiece. He sent a text message to the pre-programmed number on his phone, the signal to Valor in the van. As Blackwood continued his speech, Chayton wheeled toward the Shadow Sentinel building. Moving casually but deliberately, Coda was already approaching from another direction, timing his movement to intersect with Chayton's path. "Building has keycard access," Coda reported quietly as they met near a small utility shed. "Whitehorse provided his credentials, but we'll only have minutes before the system flags an unauthorized entry." "That's all we need," Chayton replied. "Ayanna, in position with the media. Dog demonstration starting now. All eyes are on the field." Their timing was perfect. As the crowd's attention focused on the impressive display of canine obedience and agility on the main field, Coda and Chayton approached the nondescript building. Coda swiped Whitehorse's keycard, the door opening with a soft click. Inside, the facility was clinically sterile white walls, fluorescent lighting, and the distinctive smell of antiseptic. A central hallway led to various rooms, each marked with numerical designations rather than function descriptions. "Records room should be the third door on the right," Coda said, consulting the building layout Whitehorse had provided. They moved quickly, Chayton's wheelchair making little sound on the polished floor. The records room was exactly where expected, and Whitehorse's keycard granted them access. Inside, filing cabinets lined the walls, and a computer workstation sat in one corner. "Cover me," Chayton said, wheeling to the computer and inserting a flash drive designed to bypass standard military security protocols, another gift from their inside ally. "Movement outside," Coda warned, peering through the narrow window in the door. "2 guards on routine patrol." Chayton worked rapidly, accessing the breeding program database and copying files to the drive. The screen flashed with puppy records, medical reports, and most damning of all, disposition records that clinically detailed the euthanasia of dozens of puppies for minor deficiencies. "Got it," he said, ejecting the drive as the system completed the copy. "Valor's record is here too, officially terminated due to insufficient aggression response and unauthorized decision-making." A sudden commotion in the hallway froze them both. Raised voices approached rapidly. "We've been made," Coda whispered. "Plan B." Chayton decided instantly. "Get to Ayanna with the evidence. I'll create a diversion." "That's not the plan." "Go now," Chayton commanded, his voice carrying the unmistakable authority of a combat leader. Coda hesitated only a moment before slipping through a side door as the voices grew closer. Chayton calmly wheeled himself into the hallway, directly into the path of 2 security personnel and a familiar figure, Colonel Blackwood himself, face flushed with anger. "Staff Sergeant Wicasa," Blackwood said, his surprise quickly masked by cold calculation. "You're a long way from the VA center." "Colonel," Chayton acknowledged, his posture relaxed despite the tension vibrating through him. "Just exploring the facilities. Impressive operation you've got here." "This is a restricted area, Sergeant. I don't know how you gained access, but you're trespassing on a classified facility." Blackwood signaled to the guards. "Detain him." As the guards moved forward, a commotion erupted outside the building. Through the windows, Chayton could see people pointing toward the demonstration field, where something unexpected was happening. "Sir, you need to see this," one of the guards said, looking outside with confusion. A tan and black blur was racing across the demonstration grounds, weaving through the obstacles and startling the handlers and their working dogs. Spectators rose to their feet. Cameras followed the movement, and confusion rippled through the crowd. Valor had arrived. The young dog moved with purpose. Ignoring commands from handlers who tried to intercept him, he leapt over barriers, ducked under obstacles, and made a beeline directly for the building where Chayton was being detained. "What the hell is that dog?" Blackwood demanded. Moving to the window, Chayton allowed himself a small smile. "That, Colonel, is Ghost Dog 047, service number KG7729, reported terminated by your order 6 weeks ago." Blackwood's face drained of color as he recognized the dog, not just any failed candidate, but one whose disposal he had personally ordered. Impossible, very possible, and about to become very public. Outside, Valor had reached the building, barking insistently at the door. The demonstration had completely broken down, with handlers struggling to control their own dogs as Valor's presence created chaos. More importantly, every camera on the field, including those from 3 television stations, was now filming the unfolding scene. "Detain the sergeant and secure that animal immediately," Blackwood ordered, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. As the guards moved toward Chayton, the building's door burst open. Sergeant Major Whitehorse stood there, his expression granite. "Begging the colonel's pardon," Whitehorse said formally, "but I believe you're needed at the demonstration field. The base commander is asking for an explanation of this incident." Through the open door, Valor spotted Chayton and bounded forward, placing himself protectively between his human and the guards. A low growl rumbled from his chest. Not the blind aggression Blackwood's program had tried to instill, but the calculated warning of a dog defending someone he had chosen to protect. "That dog is military property," Blackwood snapped. "Seize him now." "Actually, sir," Whitehorse said, holding up a tablet displaying official documentation. "According to these records, this animal was officially deceased as of 6 weeks ago. Dead dogs can't be military property." The standoff stretched into a tense silence, broken only by the growing commotion outside as media personnel approached the building, drawn by Valor's dramatic entrance and the obvious confrontation unfolding. "It's over, Colonel," Chayton said quietly. "The evidence of what you've been doing, the financial fraud, the puppy killings, all of it is already being distributed to the press and the Inspector General's office." Blackwood's face contorted with rage. In a sudden movement, he reached for his sidearm, desperation overriding judgment. What happened next occurred so quickly that witnesses would later disagree on the sequence. Valor launched forward with a speed that belied his young age. Blackwood's weapon cleared its holster. Chayton surged from his wheelchair, using his powerful upper body to propel himself toward the colonel. The 2 guards hesitated, confused by the conflicting authority figures. When the chaos settled, Blackwood was on the ground, his weapon skittering across the floor. Valor standing over him with teeth bared but not biting, displaying exactly the discernment and restraint that had marked him as a failure in the Shadow Sentinel program. "Stand down, son," Whitehorse said gently to Valor. "You've done your job." To everyone's amazement, the young dog immediately backed away, returning to Chayton's side as military police swarmed into the building. Alerted by the disturbance, outside, cameras captured everything: the confrontation, Valor's protective stance, and most damningly, Colonel Blackwood's attempt to draw his weapon on a disabled veteran. In the confusion, no one noticed Coda quietly passing the thumb drive to a reporter from the Washington Post. or Ayana providing medical documentation of Valor's condition when found. The story was breaking, unstoppable now, exactly as they had planned. The military police established a perimeter around the Shadow Sentinel facility with practiced efficiency, separating the key players and establishing control over the rapidly deteriorating situation. Colonel Blackwood, his face locked in a rigid mask of contained fury, was escorted to a private room for questioning. Staff Sergeant Chetan Wakasa found himself in another interrogation room, separated from Valor despite his vehement protests. "The dog stays with me," Chetan had insisted, his voice carrying the unmistakable edge of a man who wouldn't be easily denied. "Orders, Sergeant." The young MP had responded apologetically. "The animal is being secured as evidence." Those words haunted Chetan as he sat alone in the sterile room, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead like angry wasps. Evidence, not a living being who had survived abandonment and attempted murder, not a loyal companion who had just risked everything to protect him, just evidence. Hours crawled by, military intelligence officers cycled through, asking variations of the same questions. How had he discovered the Shadow Sentinel program? Who were his accomplices? What classified information had he accessed? Through it all, Chetan maintained the disciplined silence he'd been trained to hold during interrogation, answering only with his name, rank, and serial number, though he'd been out of active service for years. "You're not a prisoner of war, Wakasa," one frustrated intelligence officer finally snapped. "This isn't an enemy interrogation. You broke into a classified military facility. That's espionage, potentially treason. I want to see my dog." Chetan responded, his voice flat. "And I want a lawyer." As night fell over Fort Carson, the bureaucratic machinery ground into motion. The base commander, caught between a developing public relations nightmare and proper military protocol, had ordered a complete information lockdown, but it was too late. Video of Valor's dramatic appearance and Blackwood's reaction had already gone viral. Captured by dozens of civilian phones at the demonstration, news vans remained parked outside the main gate. Reporters broadcasting live updates about the military dog scandal unfolding within. What the public didn't see was Chetan's deteriorating condition. The stress of the day, combined with hours of sitting in his wheelchair without the ability to shift position, had triggered a cascade of physiological responses. Autonomic dysreflexia, a potentially life-threatening condition for those with spinal cord injuries, was beginning to set in. His blood pressure spiked dangerously. A pounding headache formed at the base of his skull, and cold sweat beaded on his forehead. "I need medical attention," he finally told the latest officer, his speech slightly slurred. "Spinal cord injury complication. I need my medication and to be moved to a bed." The officer, noticing Chetan's pallor and dilated pupils, summoned medical personnel. Within 30 minutes, Chetan was transferred to the base hospital, his condition serious enough that security concerns were temporarily superseded by medical necessity. In the sterile hospital room, attended by doctors unfamiliar with his medical history, Chetan fought the dual battles of his body's rebellion and worry for Valor. Where had they taken the dog? Was he receiving proper care? Did he understand why Chetan had disappeared? Through the haze of medication and pain, Chetan heard snippets of conversations outside his door. Words like public relations disaster and congressional inquiry filtered through. Someone mentioned Ayana had been detained as a person of interest, but released when her veterinary credentials proved legitimate. Coda had somehow disappeared entirely before the lockdown was implemented. Pneumonia set in during the second day, a common and dangerous complication for paraplegics under stress. Chayton's temperature spiked, his lungs filling with fluid that made each breath a labor. The base doctors, alarmed by his rapid deterioration, transferred him to intensive care. In his fevered state, Chayton's mind drifted between present reality and past traumas. The white hospital ceiling became the blinding Afghan sun. The beeping monitors transformed into the warning signals before the IED that had claimed his mobility and his teammates' lives, and sometimes, in the brief moments of clarity, he thought he heard Valor barking somewhere distant in the facility. "You need to calm down, Sergeant," a nurse told him as his agitation increased. "Your blood pressure can't handle this stress." "My dog," Chayton rasped, his voice barely audible through the oxygen mask. "Where's my dog?" No one would tell him, or perhaps they didn't know. The military machine had separated them, filing Valor away as evidence in an investigation that was growing by the hour. On the third day, as Chayton drifted in and out of consciousness, a familiar voice penetrated the fog. "His condition is deteriorating," Ayanna was saying, her professional tone barely masking the worry beneath. "He needs specialized care that accounts for his spinal cord injury. This pneumonia could kill him if not properly treated." "Dr. McCawie, you're only here as a courtesy," came a male voice, someone from military authority. "Your veterinary credentials don't qualify you to make assessments about human patients." "I'm also his medical proxy," she responded, a statement that surprised Chayton even through his fever. When had he signed those papers? Then he remembered during their preparations. Coda had suggested designating medical proxies in case something went wrong. He'd named Ayanna, trusting her medical background. "Then you need to understand the seriousness of his situation," the official continued. "Staff Sergeant Wakasa is facing potential charges of espionage, trespassing in a classified facility, and interference with a military program. His condition, while unfortunate, doesn't change that reality." "And what about your reality?" Ayanna's voice hardened. "A illegal program euthanizing puppies for profit, falsifying federal records, attempted murder of a whistleblower. How's that playing on the national news?" The conversation faded as darkness claimed Chayton again. In his dreams, he was back in the Wyoming wilderness, vultures circling overhead, but this time they were circling him. Not Valor, and he was alone, without the strength to fight them off. When he surfaced again, it was to find Sergeant Major Whitehorse sitting beside his bed, his weathered face grave in the dim light. "Wakasa," the older man said softly. "Can you hear me?" Chayton managed a slight nod, his throat too raw for speech. "I don't have much time. They're transferring you to Walter Reed tomorrow. Military intelligence wants you under federal jurisdiction." Whitehorse leaned closer. "They've classified Valor as military property. Blackwood's lawyers are arguing that since the dog was officially reported dead, you're guilty of stealing government property by taking him." Anger gave Chayton momentary clarity. He was abandoned, left to die. He wheezed. "I know that, Doctor. McCawie has provided testimony, but military courts move slowly. And meanwhile—" Whitehorse hesitated. "Meanwhile, Colonel Blackwood has filed paperwork to have Valor euthanized as part of evidence disposition once initial testing is complete." The monitors beside Chayton's bed began beeping more rapidly as his heart rate spiked. "They can't," he managed, trying to push himself upright despite the weakness in his arms. "Sergeant, you need to remain calm," Whitehorse said, glancing nervously at the door. "Your condition?" My condition. Chayton interrupted, his voice finding new strength through desperation. Is not important. That dog survived being left for dead once already. I won't let them finish the job. There's nothing you can do from this hospital bed, Whitehorse said gently. The system is working. The Inspector General has opened an official investigation. Congressional oversight has been notified, but these things take time. Valor doesn't have time, Chayton rasped. The older man nodded sadly. I know. That's why I came, to prepare you. He stood to leave, checking his watch. Dr. McAwee asked me to give you this. He slipped a small photograph onto Chayton's bedside table. For strength. After Whitehorse departed, Chayton summoned the energy to reach for the photo. It showed Valor on the day Chayton had found him emaciated, dying, but with that spark of fight still visible in his eyes. On the back, Ayanna had written in neat script, "He didn't give up then, don't give up now." That night, Chayton's fever spiked again, sending him into territories where consciousness and hallucination blended seamlessly. He saw his fallen teammates from Afghanistan, their faces peaceful now, urging him toward a light he wasn't ready to approach. He saw Masika, his former military working dog, running through sunlit fields, and somewhere, cutting through it all, he heard Valor's distinctive bark, not fearful, not aggressive, but determined, calling him back. Morning brought a team of medical personnel preparing him for transfer, still too weak to resist. Chayton could only watch as they readied equipment for his journey to Walter Reed. "Has there been any word about my dog?" he asked the nurse, adjusting his IV. "I'm sorry. I don't have any information about that," she replied with practiced neutrality. As they wheeled him toward the transport ambulance, Chayton caught a glimpse through a window of the kennel facility where military working dogs were housed. A small crowd had gathered outside uniformed personnel and what appeared to be veterinary staff. Something was happening, but from this distance, he couldn't tell what. The ambulance doors closed on his view, sealing him away from Valor and any knowledge of his fate. As the vehicle pulled away from the base hospital, Chayton felt something he hadn't experienced since the day of his injury, the overwhelming sense of failure to protect those who depended on him. First, his men in Afghanistan. Now, Valor. The darkness that descended wasn't physical, but spiritual, a crushing weight of despair that even his warrior's heart couldn't immediately fight. In exposing Blackwood's corruption, he might have sealed Valor's fate. The tragic irony wasn't lost on him. In trying to save the dog, he might have led him directly to the end that had been intended all along. Walter Reed National Military Medical Center in Bethesda, Maryland, was a far cry from the Stark Base Hospital at Fort Carson. Chayton's private room overlooked carefully manicured grounds. Medical equipment hummed with reassuring efficiency, and the staff moved with the practiced competence of those accustomed to treating America's wounded warriors. For all its comforts, however, it remained what it truly was to Chayton, a prison where he was separated from Valor by thousands of miles and layers of military bureaucracy. His condition had stabilized during the military medical transport, the specialized team addressing his pneumonia and dysreflexia with appropriate protocols. Physically, he was recovering. Mentally, he dwelled in a dark place, haunted by the absence of information about Valor's fate. Each time he asked, he received the same practiced response. That information is part of an ongoing investigation. Sergeant Wicasa. On his third day at Walter Reed, a military attorney arrived to discuss his case. Captain Sarah Jenkins was brisk and professional, laying out the potential charges against him with clinical detachment. trespassing in a classified military installation, unauthorized access of classified information, potential theft of government property. She looked up from her notes. These are serious charges, Sergeant. The dog was abandoned to die. Chayton responded, his voice stronger than it had been in days. Left with vultures circling. That's not decommissioning government property, that's criminal abuse. Captain Jenkins' expression didn't change. I'm here to represent your interests, not to judge the circumstances. Now, there may be room for plea negotiations, especially given your service record and medical condition. I'm not interested in pleas. I want to know where Valor is and what's happening to him. The attorney sighed, closing her portfolio. I'll see what information I can obtain about the animal's status. In the meantime, consider your options carefully. The evidence against you is substantial. After she left, Chayton stared out the window at the spring afternoon, feeling more isolated than he had in even his most reclusive days after the injury. For all the people around him, doctors, nurses, military officials, he had never felt more alone. Even his anger, usually a reliable companion during difficult times, had dulled to a hollow ache. The sound of his room door opening barely registered until a familiar voice broke through his despondency. "You look terrible, brother." Chayton turned to find Coda filling the doorway. Dressed in civilian clothes with a visitor's badge clipped to his shirt pocket, behind him stood Ayana, her expression a careful mask that cracked slightly when she saw Chayton's condition. "How did you get in here?" Chayton asked, genuinely surprised. "Officially, I'm listed as your cousin, here for a family visit. The staff sergeant at the security desk might have been persuaded by my charm." Coda grinned, though it didn't quite reach his eyes, and the congressional aide credentials didn't hurt. "Congressional aide?" Ayana stepped forward, placing a small duffel bag on the foot of his bed. "A lot has happened in the 4 days you've been transferred. Chayton, we've been busy." Valor. The name escaped him like a prayer. Their exchanged glance sent ice through his veins. "He's alive," Coda said quickly, seeing Chayton's reaction. "That's the first thing you need to know." "But," Chayton prompted, reading the reservation in their expressions, "but Blackwood had him removed from Fort Carson and transferred to a private research facility in Virginia before Whitehorse could intervene." Ayana explained, pulling a chair closer to his bed. "They're calling it evidence preservation, but we believe they plan to eliminate him once the initial investigation runs its course." Chayton struggled to sit more upright, fighting against both weakness and the crushing weight of this news. "Where exactly is he?" "That's the first part of why we're here," Coda said, glancing toward the door before lowering his voice. "Whitehorse managed to place a GPS tracker in Valor's collar before the transfer, and Ayana has a more significant revelation." Ayana leaned closer. "When I first treated Valor, I implanted a second microchip, my own. Not military, standard procedure for all my patients, but I never registered it officially." Her eyes gleamed with subtle triumph. "As far as the military knows, Valor only has his original identification chip, but I can prove his identity independently through my chip's registry." The implications dawned on Chayton slowly. "So even if they try to claim he's not the same dog from the Shadow Sentinel program, we have irrefutable proof," she confirmed. "But that's not all." She reached into the duffel bag and withdrew a tablet, activating it with a swipe. "While you've been here, I've been busy with the help of a forensic pathologist friend. We exhumed several puppies from the site I discovered when I worked for the program." The tablet displayed images that made Chayton's stomach churn small. Decomposed remains of puppies, carefully arranged for forensic documentation. 7 puppies, all with Shadow Sentinel identification chips, all euthanized despite being medically sound. Ayana continued. The autopsies show no health defects that would justify euthanasia under any ethical standard. Some were as young as 8 weeks old. And here's where it gets really interesting, Coda added, producing a thumb drive. The financial records we recovered show Blackwood was receiving kickbacks from a private military contractor, Palmer Strategic Solutions. They were paying premium prices for the successful dogs from the program, while the government footed the bill for the breeding and initial training. The euthanasias artificially inflated the program's success metrics, Ayana explained, making it seem like only the most exceptional dogs made it through, justifying the exorbitant prices Palmer was paying and the bonuses Blackwood was receiving. Chayton absorbed this information, his tactical mind beginning to function again after days of fog. Does the Inspector General have this evidence? Not just the Inspector General, Coda said with a grim smile. Congresswoman Malia Talassi of the Armed Services Committee has opened a formal inquiry. She's the one who provided my aid credentials. Talassi. The name was familiar. The former indigenous rights attorney? The same. She's taken a personal interest in this case, especially after learning about the Native American connections you— Me? Whitehorse? Coda's expression turned serious. But Blackwood has powerful friends in defense contracting and the Pentagon. They're working to classify everything related to Shadow Sentinel, which would bury the evidence under national security protocols. How long before they succeed? Days, maybe less. The facility where they're holding Valor is scheduled for a security renovation tomorrow night, a perfect cover for making evidence disappear. So, what's the plan? Chayton asked, feeling a spark of his old fire returning. Coda and Ayana exchanged another glance, this one with a different energy determination mixed with conspiracy. That's the second reason we're here, Coda said, keeping his voice low. Walter Reed is remarkably lax about patient movements for physical therapy, garden visits, and so forth, especially for decorated veterans with spinal injuries who need regular circulation improvement. Chayton's eyebrows rose. You're suggesting I just leave temporarily? Ayana clarified. Long enough to retrieve Valor and bring him to Congresswoman Talassi's office, where he'll be protected under congressional privilege until the hearing. And if we're caught, then I lose my veterinary license. Coda probably goes to jail for aiding an escape, and you face additional charges, Ayana said bluntly. But if we do nothing, Valor dies, and Blackwood eventually buries this entire scandal. The choice, when presented so starkly, wasn't really a choice at all. Chayton felt a wave of resolve wash away days of despair and weakness. When do we move? 4 hours later, as evening settled over the medical center, Chayton found himself being wheeled through the hospital's ground floor by Coda. Dressed convincingly in orderly scrubs, their progress through the building raised no alarms, just another patient getting evening physical therapy. Security cameras, Chayton murmured as they approached a service exit. Looping previous footage for the next 10 minutes, Coda replied under his breath, courtesy of a grateful veteran in the security office whose service dog came from my rescue foundation. Outside, Ayana waited with a specially equipped van, the same one they'd used at Fort Carson, modified for Chayton's needs. Within minutes, they were driving away from Walter Reed, merging into the evening traffic of the nation's capital. The facility is in Quantico, Ayana explained, passing Chayton a folder with satellite images. Officially a Marine Corps training annex, but actually operated by Palmer Strategic Solutions under a defense contract. Security, Chayton asked, examining the images. 2 perimeter fences, Guard rotation every 30 minutes. Electronic access to the main building. Coda detailed. But we have two advantages. First, they don't expect anyone to be looking for a dog they've classified as secret evidence. Second, we have this. He handed Chayton a small electronic device with a simple display showing a blinking dot. Valor's GPS tracker. He's being kept in the southwest corner of the compound, in what appears to be an isolation kennel. And our approach, direct but disguised. Ayanna said, I have legitimate veterinary credentials and documentation stating I've been contracted to assess Palmer's working dogs for certification. Coda will pose as my assistant. The distraction should give you enough time to locate Valor. The plan was simple, elegant, and incredibly risky, but as Chayton reviewed the facility layout, he felt something he hadn't experienced since the mission began, genuine hope. For the first time, they were taking direct action rather than reacting to Blackwood's moves. 2 hours later, they parked on a service road a quarter-mile from the Palmer facility. Night had fully descended, providing the cover of darkness as Coda helped Chayton from the van into his wheelchair. "Com check," Coda said, adjusting his earpiece. "Clear," Chayton confirmed. "Remember, we only have a 20-minute window while I keep the duty veterinarian occupied with paperwork," Ayanna reminded them. "After that, they'll start wondering why I need to inspect kennels at this hour." 20 minutes is plenty," Chayton assured her, his Special Forces training resurfacing as adrenaline cleared the last cobwebs from his mind. They separated, Ayanna driving ahead to the main gate with her official documents. Coda and Chayton taking a maintenance path that Coda's intelligence had identified as minimally monitored. The perimeter fence proved less challenging than anticipated. With a service gate secured by a padlock that yielded quickly to Coda's specialized tools, they moved silently across the darkened grounds. Chayton's wheelchair surprisingly agile on the paved pathways between buildings, the GPS tracker led them to a low, cinder-block structure set apart from the main facilities. A single guard stood at the entrance, scrolling through his phone with bored indifference. "Wait here," Coda whispered, disappearing into the shadows. Moments later, from the opposite direction, came the sound of breaking glass. The guard immediately responded, moving toward the disturbance with his hand on his sidearm. "Move now," came Coda's voice through the earpiece. Chayton wheeled rapidly to the building's entrance. The door was secured with an electronic keypad, but Coda had anticipated this. Earlier that day, Sergeant Major Whitehorse had provided the likely access code, the standard Palmer facility's default, which was rarely changed at satellite locations. The numbers worked on the first try. The door clicked open, revealing a dimly lit corridor lined with kennels. Most were empty, but from the farthest one came a soft whine that Chayton would have recognized anywhere. Valor. He moved quickly down the corridor, the GPS signal strengthening with each foot. At the last kennel, he found what he sought: Valor, confined in a space barely large enough for him to turn around, a medical monitoring device attached to his collar. "Hey, soldier," Chayton said softly. Valor's reaction was instantaneous. His ears perked forward, his entire body quivering with recognition and desperate joy. A soft whine escaped him, not quite a bark, as if he understood the need for silence. The kennel was secured with a standard padlock, which Chayton made quick work of using a small tool from his pocket. As the door swung open, Valor launched himself forward, nearly toppling Chayton from his wheelchair in his eagerness to reach him. "Easy, boy," Chayton murmured, fighting unexpected tears as Valor's tongue frantically licked his face and hands. "I've got you now." The monitoring device was quickly removed and disabled. In its place, Chayton secured a small camera that Congresswoman Talassi's office had provided, creating an unimpeachable record of Valor's rescue and condition. "Package secured," he reported into his earpiece. "Moving to extraction." "Hurry," came Ayana's tense reply. "I've about exhausted my credentials here. The staff is getting suspicious." With Valor trotting obediently beside his wheelchair, Chayton retraced their path to the exit. They were halfway down the corridor when the unmistakable sound of an alarm shattered the night's quiet. "We've been made!" Coda's voice came urgently through the earpiece. "Southeast perimeter breach reported. They think it's a diversion. All personnel responding." "Including the gate guards?" Chayton asked tersely. "Affirmative. Use the maintenance gate on the west side. I'll meet you there." Chayton altered course immediately. Valor, keeping perfect pace beside him, the young dog showed no hesitation, no fear, despite his days of confinement. If anything, he seemed energized by the mission, occasionally looking up at Chayton as if for confirmation that they were, indeed, escaping together. They reached the western perimeter just as floodlights began sweeping the compound. In the distance, shouts and the sound of vehicles indicated the security response was in full swing. "Where are you?" "Coda," Chayton muttered, scanning the darkness. "Here," came a whispered response as Coda materialized from the shadows. "They've locked down the main gates, but the maintenance access is clear." Together, they moved through the small gate, Valor slipping easily through the narrow opening. Once outside the perimeter, they moved as quickly as Chayton's wheelchair would allow along the darkened service road. The van appeared ahead, its engine already running, Ayana at the wheel with an expression of intense relief as they approached. "You made it," she breathed as Coda helped Chayton and Valor into the vehicle. "And you found him?" "More like he found me," Chayton replied, unable to stop the smile spreading across his face as Valor pressed against him, unwilling to allow even inches of separation after their reunion. As they drove away, leaving the Palmer facility and its alarms behind, Chayton examined Valor more carefully. The dog had lost weight again during his confinement, but his eyes were clear and alert, his spirit unbroken by whatever had happened during their separation. "Next stop, Capitol Hill," Ayana announced, her voice steady with purpose. "Congresswoman Talassi is waiting with the Inspector General and a Washington Post reporter." Valor settled his head on Chayton's lap, amber eyes looking up with absolute trust. Whatever came next, legal battles, military tribunals, media storms, they would face it together. The truth was finally coming to light, and nothing Blackwood or his allies could do would stop it now. 1 year later, Chayton sat on the porch of his new ranch house, watching as the Wyoming sunset painted the distant mountains in shades of amber and gold. Beside him, Valor lounged contentedly, his coat now glossy and full, his frame filled out to the robust proportions of a healthy adult German shepherd. At 18 months old, he had matured into a magnificent animal, alert and dignified, yet still possessing the playful spirit that emerged during their daily training sessions. "Beautiful evening," Ayana observed, stepping onto the porch with 2 steaming mugs of coffee. She handed one to Chayton before settling into the adjacent chair, her gaze following his toward the mountains. "Hard to believe it's been a year," Chayton replied, absently scratching behind Valor's ears. The dog leaned into the touch with obvious pleasure, his eyes half closing in contentment. So much had changed in those 12 months. The congressional hearings had been explosive, drawing national attention to the Shadow Sentinel program and the broader issues of military animal welfare. Congresswoman Talassi had proven a formidable ally, her background in indigenous rights law providing a unique perspective on the justice they sought. Colonel Blackwood now faced court-martial on charges ranging from financial fraud to animal cruelty. Several of his civilian co-conspirators at Palmer Strategic Solutions had already accepted plea deals in exchange for testimony. The scandal had prompted a comprehensive review of military working dog programs nationwide, with new oversight protocols and welfare standards being implemented for Chaitin. The personal journey had been equally transformative. The charges against him had been dropped as public opinion swung decisively in his favor. Aided by Valor's compelling presence at the hearings, the dog had sat quietly beside Chaitin's wheelchair throughout the proceedings, his dignified bearing and obvious bond with the veteran speaking volumes to the committee members and public alike. Coda called earlier. Ayanna mentioned, sipping her coffee. "The new facility is almost ready." Chaitin nodded, his chest warming with pride at the thought. The second chance. Canine Foundation had been his idea, a rehabilitation and placement center for retired and rejected military working dogs, located on 50 acres of Wyoming land not far from where he'd found Valor. The foundation represented everything he'd fought for during the past year. First group arrives next week, he confirmed. 6 dogs from the disbanded Shadow Sentinel program, all deemed unsuitable for military service, and all perfectly suitable for new lives as service dogs, therapy animals, or beloved pets. Ayanna added with a smile. Their relationship had evolved gradually over the months following the congressional hearings. Ayanna had returned to Wyoming first. Reopening her veterinary practice in Prairie Wind, Chaitin had remained in Washington longer, working with lawmakers on military dog welfare legislation that now bore Valor's name. When he'd finally returned to Wyoming, it was with purpose and direction that had been missing from his life since the injury. The foundation had started as an idea discussed during late-night strategy sessions and had grown into reality through the combined efforts of their unlikely team, Chaitin's leadership, Ayanna's veterinary expertise, Coda's security and training knowledge, and Sergeant Major Whitehorse's continued advocacy within military channels. Now, 6 months after breaking ground, the facility was nearly ready to welcome its first canine residents, state-of-the-art rehabilitation areas, spacious kennels designed for comfort rather than confinement, and training fields stretched across the property. Most importantly, a dedicated staff of veterans and animal welfare experts waited to provide the specialized care these dogs needed. Valor would serve as the foundation's ambassador, living proof of the potential these animals possessed when given a second chance. He had already begun training as Chaitin's official service dog, showing a natural aptitude for the work. Though Chaitin's paralysis remained permanent, his overall health had improved dramatically with Valor's assistance and encouragement. "Sometimes I think he saved me more than I saved him," Chaitin admitted quietly, watching as Valor's ears perked at a distant sound, a coyote calling from somewhere in the foothills. "I think you saved each other," Ayanna replied, her hand finding his in the gathering twilight. "That's how healing works. It's never just one-directional." The sound of tires on gravel announced a visitor. Valor stood, alert but not alarmed, his tail wagging as he recognized the approaching vehicle. "That'll be Coda with the new signage," Chaitin said, checking his watch. Sure enough, Coda's truck pulled up beside the house, its bed loaded with large wooden signs bearing the foundation's name and logo, a silhouette of a dog and human walking side by side beneath a rising sun. "Perfect timing," Coda called as he climbed from the vehicle. "Just got the last one finished." He reached into the truck bed and carefully withdrew one of the smaller signs, bringing it forward for their inspection. The craftsmanship was impeccable, The wood stained a rich cedar hue with the lettering burned deep into its surface. Second Chance K9 Foundation, where valor finds purpose. It's perfect, Chayton said, his voice rough with emotion he no longer tried to hide. As they admired the sign, Valor suddenly stiffened. His attention focused on the road leading to the property. Moments later, another vehicle appeared, a government SUV with military plates. "Were we expecting anyone?" Ayana asked, tension evident in her voice despite the program's official vindication. "Actually, yes," Chayton replied with a smile. "That would be Sergeant Major Whitehorse. He mentioned he might stop by today." The SUV parked beside Coda's truck, and the distinguished Navajo senior NCO emerged. He wasn't alone. Behind him came a young woman in uniform, leading a German shepherd whose resemblance to Valor was unmistakable. "Staff Sergeant Wakasa," Whitehorse called in greeting as he approached the porch. "Hope we're not interrupting." "Never," Chayton assured him. Wheeling forward to meet them, Valor moved protectively beside him, but showed no aggression toward the newcomers, only curious interest, especially in the other dog. "I'd like you to meet Lieutenant Casey Redhawk," Whitehorse said, introducing the young officer. "And this is Alba, one of the Shadow Sentinel program females. She's been retired from service following the program's dissolution." Understanding dawned on Chayton instantly. "Alba is Valor's mother," Whitehorse confirmed. "DNA testing confirmed it during the investigation. Lieutenant Redhawk has been her handler for the past 2 years and requested permission to bring her here personally when she learned of your foundation." Valor and Alba regarded each other with the curious intensity unique to canines. There was no dramatic recognition scene like in the movies, no howling reunion or instant bonding. Instead, there was something more subtle but equally powerful, a quiet acknowledgment between two beings who shared both blood and similar journeys. "She's our gift to the Foundation," Lieutenant Redhawk explained, "the first of many military working dogs who deserve their second chance." As the day's final light gilded the gathering on the porch, Chayton felt a sense of completion he'd never expected to find again after his injury. From the brink of death, Valor had not only survived, but thrived, becoming the catalyst for something larger than either of them. The Foundation would help hundreds of dogs in the years to come, animals who, like Valor, deserved more than to be discarded when they didn't meet arbitrary standards. "Welcome home, Alba," Chayton said softly, watching as mother and son cautiously circled each other, beginning the process of building their own relationship. "Your son's been waiting for you." In that moment, as the first stars appeared above the Wyoming mountains, the journey that had begun with vultures circling a dying puppy completed its arc. What had started with one man's simple act of compassion had expanded into a mission of redemption and purpose. Valor, sensing the significance of the moment, pressed against Chayton's leg and looked up at him with those intelligent amber eyes that had first captured his heart on that dusty roadside. In them, Chayton saw everything that mattered: loyalty, trust, and the unspoken promise that neither of them would ever walk alone again. The shadows had reclaimed the light, transforming darkness into something beautiful and full of hope. In the twilight of our lives, we often wonder if our greatest contributions are behind us. Chayton and Valor's journey reminds us that purpose doesn't end with retirement or physical limitation sometimes. It's just beginning. Like Valor, abandoned and left for dead, many of us feel set aside after decades of service, our wisdom and experience overlooked in a rapidly changing world, and like Chayton, isolated by trauma and loss, we may retreat from life's challenges. believing our fighting days are over. Their story speaks to the healing power of unexpected connections, how saving another soul can ultimately save our own. When Chaitan wheeled himself from his solitary existence to defend a vulnerable creature, he rediscovered his warrior spirit. Through valor's resilience, he found strength to battle injustice once more. This resonates deeply for those of us navigating our senior years, feeling the weight of physical changes while our spirits remain young and vital. The Second Chance Foundation wasn't just for discarded military dogs, it was Chaitan's second chance too. No matter our age or circumstance, we all deserve the opportunity to reclaim purpose, forge meaningful connections, and transform our hardest battles into our most profound legacy. I hope you enjoyed today's story. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Leave a like and comment below what you thought of the story. See you in the next video.